everybody. So thank you again for attending our Heal Venture Lab podcast. Here we have with Dr. Shuwen Koh, who used to be the Chief Technology Officer for National University Health System in Singapore, and also with she has a lot of exposure. I mean, working I think 10 plus years, and all in the NUHS, looking at different technologies and also working in the different startups in Singapore. Yes, hello. So hello, Shuwen, how are you?
Hi, Jaemin. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Hey, so thank you very much for joining. So you have a very interesting background in terms of like being in the innovation ecosystem, I guess, for many years, working in different companies. And of course, NUHS is one of the large top one of the three major clusters in Singapore. And your role probably had you see all kinds of innovations happening in Singapore. And you probably have some, I guess, things to share about like what are some opportunities, but also some challenges. So maybe we can start a little about yourself, and then you can, I guess, kind of, like a transition into like what you see and what are some of the things you want to, I guess, discuss. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much. So I started my, I guess, academic training in material science. And then I got very intrigued by biomaterials and how really healthcare has a lot of material aspects to it, right? So I did my PhD in biomedical engineering at UCLA. And when I returned home to Singapore, I first started my career at the Economic Development Board, and that gave me really a very broad overview of what the biomedical sciences, the life sciences industry is like in Singapore. And then I was with a startup for a couple of years before I joined NUHS, the National University Health System, as you mentioned. And then 5 years ago, I took on a secondary portfolio at the National University, also managing the IP. But I left about a year ago to, kind of build my own startup and business. But during my 10 years at NUHS, it was definitely eye-opening. And in a way, I was very glad that I started at the university health system rather than from the university, because I realized that from the health practitioner, healthcare practitioner point of view, they really are quite agnostic to technology, right? So they're really wanting to solve a problem. So there was a lot more of a technology pull rather than a technology push, which is what the universities tend to do.
Okay. Maybe so why the university is different from the health systems? I'm just what are some of the I think differences? Yeah.
Yeah, so for example, the doctors, the clinicians, right? They encounter, especially if they do procedures like surgery or scopes, they encounter issues on a day-to-day basis, and they see the patients kind of suffer through, or not from any ill intent, but just sometimes the technology or the solutions or the devices is not quite able to provide a thorough or good comprehensive solution, right? So the clinicians see this day in, day out. And so it's actually quite interesting that I see a lot of very good innovation from the more experienced, the more mature um, procedurists and technologists, right? Whereas the younger doctors, because pros and cons. They have less baggage, maybe, so
Mm.
they're less held back by certain things. So they're quicker to adopt things that are maybe cutting edge, but not quite yet proven. And they don't necessarily have the insights, clinical practice insights that their more experienced colleagues have. So I see actually very different solutions that they come up with. And then as they observe these problems, they go look for technologies, but they're not, necessarily fixated on one technology. Whereas from the university point of view, the principal investigators, the scientists, the PIs, they tend to come with a technology and then they will try to find a problem that their technology can solve. And sometimes they bark up the wrong tree, right? So, I think the perspective is different, and where true partnership and true collaboration happens is when the person with the problem and the person with potential solutions keep an open mind and can come together and meet.
Yeah, I mean the your point about I mean university guys basically have something and they want to just fit in with what they have. And then, of course, the guys in the health systems typically probably have some problem and they want to solve it. Uh, I mean, of course, I think that there's a pros and cons. I mean, you do need some innovation from scratch, right? But you also need, I guess, some kind of insight. I mean, like a kind of create technology based on need, right? Versus, I guess, like concepts. Or, I mean, I mean, I guess on the drug side, it'd be more like molecules, right? Some pathways they're looking at, and then they're trying to see, okay,
Mhm.
so can this work? Yeah, so a very different approach. Which of these typically? I mean, I'm sure you've seen a lot of these, right? Well, let's start with the first. How many do you normally see, like at any given time? Let's say per month or per year. Yeah.
Per year, I will say I would see at least a handful a week. So, if you multiply that by 52, I could see, a couple hundred invention disclosures, or it's not always new, right? Because as with the IP filing stages, there's an invention disclosure and then they go into the provisional stage. And that provisional stage of 1 year gives them the time to kind of interrogate the solution a little bit more, generate a little bit more data, and have a better use case because it strengthens their claims. Then we go into PCT conversion. So I'll say at any 1 year, I see a couple of hundred in various stages of development.
Would you maybe share maybe some from example? I mean, doesn't have to like mention names, but just kind of maybe like some old example, okay? But just kind of example of like you see like the university going to the like looking for different needs, and also another example of let's say clinicians or some users finding I guess demand and trying to feed the technology backwards. Maybe you can have some. Maybe you can share some live examples. Yeah.
Yeah, so I can give some examples. I won't name names, but if people were to Google it, it's in the public domain anyway.
Yeah.
So I had an interventional radiologist who
Hmm.
does a lot of liver biopsies. And, he's very experienced, but he was routinely still losing patients due to, bleeding, overbleeding, even under his very skilled hands. And he said,
Hmm.
why do I have to, be put up with losing patients, right? So currently liver biopsies are done two ways: percutaneous, where you kind of go through the side, right? And then it punctures through and you take a tissue sample from the liver, or you go through the jugular. Um, Both have risks of bleeding. And I think patients generally don't like having, something put through the neck, right? It just feels very vulnerable. So he actually came up with using the vein. It's like, when you take blood from the vein. And of course, the tricky part is there's a U-turn right at the top of the arm. But he's actually navigated a really elegant system. And we hope to, well, I still say we, they hope to be undertaking clinical trials this year, first in man, first in human clinical trials to in a small number of patients to as a proof of concept,
Hmm.
right? And I thought it's such an awesome example because he's dabbled in some innovation, and he's worked with large MedTech companies, so he's kind of cut his teeth a little bit. But he also realized from his first few forays that partnering with the big MedTech companies, um, it's not so advantageous to him because he gets a very small upside, right? And then they take it and he kind of loses his baby, right? So in this case, we actually, NUHS and NUS actually applied for a lot of government grants. We kind of stitched together a patchwork, right? And
Hmm.
we supported his IP filing, and then they spun off a couple of years ago, and then
Hmm.
now they're doing, a little bit of private fundraising to take the device into clinic. Then I believe that he will also then partner with the big boys, so that they can take it global because um, distribution, reimbursement, adoption, all these are really, really complicated processes that a small startup doesn't have the deep enough pockets or the muscles to really power through. So that's one. And that was quite a he had the idea, and
Hmm.
then different entities, different funding bodies really kind of supported him. And then
Oh,
I had
so before we go to the second one, I'm curious. Um, so how many? I mean, so like this would be a success case typically of how many like that you normally see. I mean, most of the guys don't make it this far, right?
yeah.
So how did he? I mean, like, what do you think was the difference? What do you think was a differentiator for somebody like him, versus let's say other clinicians who like come up with a so they have some like something that they see, but then it never makes it to the next stage. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was definitely very, very self-driven, right? So he championed his project. I have some PIs or some clinicians who will come to me and say, I have a great idea. I want you to take it and run with it.
Hmm.
And I tell them it doesn't work that way.
Ah,
You
okay.
have the clinician has to own it, has to drive it, has to be the champion, right?
Yes.
So no amount of me being the nanny or the orphanage, right? I tell my PIs, I'm not an orphanage, I'm
Yeah.
not a foster home. I can help, be part of the village to raise this child, but I cannot take over from you. So I think the success cases, I always see that the PI, the clinician, is super driven and really takes ownership and accountability.
So, like even myself, when I was training, like I had some ideas. So this was in the US, I think it was at Baylor. And then, of course, I had to talk to the patent office. But then, of course, I mean, like I was obviously not the one. I mean, I didn't know anything at the time, so I obviously couldn't drive it. And of course, it just ended as a good, I guess, discussion. But it never like came out to anything. Um, so I mean, but the thing is, you have to also educate these guys, right? Because a lot of young doctors will not know like how to. I mean, they wouldn't even know where to go. I mean, let's say I remember there was one classmate who was talking about making some device to treat to treat ascites, in the abdomen. Was it or was it I forgot where, but anyhow, something like that, some drainage device. And I was like, wow, yeah, you should take this forward. But then, of course, I mean, this has been like more than 10 plus years. I mean, so nothing happened. But of course, not to fault the guys, but it's more like a lot of these young doctors or even senior guys, they're like, so like busy with their practice, and they really don't have time to like foster. I mean,
Mhm.
unless, as you said, you have to like have that kind of a drive, right? Yeah. So how do you like educate these guys, and do you have some kind of support that you give them? Yeah.
Yeah, so I can think of a few cases, right? So this particular liver biopsy device, we actually found like engineering design houses and other partners to help him actually fabricate like prototypes and stuff, right? Because he's a clinician, he's not an engineer. So while he has the idea and what the solution should be able to achieve, he's not the guy who's going to be able to design it, right? So we really brought kind of a village around him, and at different stages, the villagers look different, right? Because he's at a different stage. He might need to scale up, and he might need to, introduce a new function, and that new function would need a new material or a new engineering something, right? And then there are some doctors who they're just like the idea engine, right? Then what you need to bring around him is a set of operators and executors
Mm,
who can make it happen. And I would say that is a little bit harder, but
mm.
not impossible. But it's really understanding that innovation is a long and complicated and complex journey, and that several different players need to come around the table, right? It's very, very rarely a one-man show.
And you being the innovation office in NUHS, so these people come to you, right? And you basically offer them support, right? But of course, like the university health system also has to have some ownership, right? So I mean, if they take on your help, right, then university health system has to take on some ownership. What's the typical structure for that? I mean, you don't have to go into the actual numbers, but I'm just curious, how, and I'm sure you talk to other universities in Singapore and also other countries as well, right? You network with these guys. So, like, what's the typical structure? Of engagement? Is it pretty similar with across different countries, or is it
Um,
maybe
I
like a particular? Yeah.
I think it varies actually,
Mm,
depending on how um, risk, how open the cluster, the leadership, right, really is to risk. So before my time, but it was a legacy issue that I heard about.
mm,
There was a PI with a molecule that he wanted to put into clinical trial, but nobody wanted to assume liability, right? And it dragged on for 2 years, right? I can't remember if or how they eventually managed to solve it, but I learned from that lesson. And it was a song that I kept singing, a sermon, if you will, that I kept preaching to my leadership that, look, there's always going to be risk, right? So it's about risk mitigation and, everybody doing as much due diligence as we can. But we're going to have to, for example, NUH, which is one of the hospitals under the NUHS cluster, NUH, at the leadership level, made the decision to say that, okay, we are willing to be the clinical sponsor for first in human trials.
mm,
And we also made the decision that our PIs, our principal investigators, are allowed to be principal investigators on the trial, right? Despite people saying, oh, there's a conflict of interest. And we're like, look, if there's no interest, yes, there's no conflict, but there's also not going to be any innovation. Right, let's get that clear. So
mm,
interest is not an issue. It's how you mitigate it. And honestly, also people who understand the clinical trial and regulatory process know that nothing is approved just based on the first in human trial. The first in human trial is not for regulatory marketing approval. It's just for proof of concept. So we're totally okay with the PI being the PI on the first in human trial because then phase two or larger phase trials, it's global, right? Then the conflict of interest is completely diluted out. So we take on sponsorship. Well, I keep saying we. NUH takes on sponsorship of the trial. NUH
mm,
allows their PI to be the PI on the trial, first in human trial. And we have worked it out in the clinical trial contract that um, the manufacturer takes on manufacturing liability, right? So
Mm,
we ended up kind of splitting liability, which is
mm,
very fair because the manufacturer is, I mean, it's only responsible that they say, okay, we manufactured this, we put this together. We believe that, any manufacturing defect related issues, we will take responsibility for. But NUH and the PI says any clinical trial related issues, we take responsibility for. So then we were able to progress pretty quickly, right? Instead of like people saying, no, 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 we're not taking liability. I don't know how this is handled in the other clusters, but this is how NUHS does it.
So before, I mean, so that's like a ideal where different stakeholders assume liability related to their domain. But I mean, how was it done before that? Like if you're suggesting this, then then before there must be some kind of a like a less ideal way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, so some prototypes, for example, were assembled in the NUS lab.
Hmm.
And then NUS is like, we're not taking liability, which I understand where they're coming from, right? Because the PI's lab, who knows? There's no ISO, there is no I mean, the different standards, right? And the prototype really is a prototype. So especially if it's a class like two or, you know, more in intrusive, invasive device, then I could totally understand why NUS would say, we're not taking liability. So in the past, it used to be that they did the prototypes in the lab, right? So now we say, no, 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 please do not take a prototype from the lab and put it in a human, right? Make sure that early on enough in the process, you do a tech transfer to a contract manufacturer who has, the ISO, the 13485s, and then they can properly go through the process, design history file, quality management system, and properly, be able to assume manufacturing liability.
Hmm. Okay. So let's say in the so you probably have this provision in contract where it kind of limits the liability of the stakeholders based on then what do they get? I mean, do they get something else in return?
Who's they? Who's the they you're referring to?
Let's say contract manufacturers, etc. I mean, contract manufacturers maybe they're just coming as a service provider, right?
Yep.
Then maybe they're getting paid to do the work, or maybe university funds them through grant. I don't know. Like, but then they're just being a service provider. So I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
So that's a fair point, right? So we do cap the liability, so it's not unlimited liability, and it's usually pegged to maybe the quantum of the service contract. Some service providers, because the money is in the manufacturing, right? Especially if you are successful and you scale up.
Yes.
So then the contract manufacturer has the eye on that goal to say that, hey, when you succeed, then it I mean we don't pre-negotiate that because it's a little bit early to tell, but a lot of contract manufacturers do have their eye on
Hmm.
eventually they might be the manufacturer for that device.
I mean, let's say if I'm engaging a service provider, let's say to make something, then of course the liability will be limited to whatever that they're putting together, right? But of course I'm paying them money, and I'm not thinking about okay, well now you don't have any upside because I'm just engaging as a service provider. In this case, I guess maybe the guys, maybe the startup or the PI wants to I guess get some support, right? And maybe like get these guys to do this not not as a service, but some kind of I guess like a partner almost. Give some kind of upside. Is that how it works?
Um, I think some of that is possible, but it does get a little bit complicated. So I know in the US, for example, law firms can do that. Right?
Hmm.
So law firms can say, I charge you less, I'm on a lower fee retainer, but then when you spin off, then I get some equity in lieu, right? sweat
Yeah.
equity. But it's not legal in Singapore for law firms to do that. But
Mm.
I haven't come across a case where a contract manufacturer asks for that. But I do know that in some of the spin-offs, um, the engineering design house has in mind, the scale-up manufacturing contract.
Okay. Okay. Which so like I think it's good to understand how different stakeholders can. I mean, it kind of gives me an idea of how this is being structured based on what you said. Um, what so I mean, of course, earlier we mentioned about some of the guys who are like different, right? So, how do the successful the spin-off look like versus the ones that have a lot of trouble? Maybe you can share some examples on that one.
Yeah, so the ones who tend to be more successful are the ones that touch base regularly, especially in the beginning, right? Because um, they are paving the road as they walk, right?
Mm,
So, and interestingly enough, um, it it isn't always best to spin off early, right? Of course, if you spin off early, you have less data. It's a maybe cheaper license deal, but 100% of zero is zero,
mm,
right?
mm,
So the ones that I've seen that have kind of, you know, pre-spin-off, try to get as much non-dilutive funding as possible, get institutional support, and then they spin off. um, I feel those tend to do a little bit better. And they bring in, they're willing to pay, right, for advice and service, rather than say, I hear from the grapevine, and startup grapevine is it's like super tangled because there's no one startup that's the same as another. So those who are willing to pay for, legal advice on shareholding, structuring of the cap table, they tend to do better, right? And they tend to also um, not need to fundraise as early and give away, too much of their equity.
So staying in in the system is longer as long as possible to maximize, I guess, the I guess the resources.
Yeah, there is a balance though, because
Yeah, of
those
course.
that stay too long, kind of die in utero, right? Because the window is lost and there's only that much, you talk to investors and there's only that much they can hear and that long that they are willing to say, oh, you're still in the incubation phase.
What's wrong with it being in the incubation phase? Well, what's the downside then? Well, like, what's the downside of being in the incubation phase?
The loss of speed, I will say,
Mm,
right? Because in the institution, you're subject to a lot of procurement, um, procedures. You're subject to a lot of grant timelines. You
mm,
you you may need approvals for certain, moving money around. So you're not able to respond very quickly.
mm.
And you may have to, for example, for procurement, you may have to put out like a tender for three quotes, right? And it's just too slow.
Okay. So I think that's something I guess I see with other incubation, I guess the innovation offices also in other places. Maybe it's changing the topic. Um, so now I want to talk a bit about the industry partnership, right? Now we want. I mean, because eventually all these guys have to, like as you mentioned, right? On the one spectrum, they're solving the problem, but solving the problem and also able to commercialize.
Hmm.
Uh, Actually, one company working on right now, I mean, they already has a US FDA approval, but then because actually the market's too competitive, it's they're doing a different indication. So how do you filter this out early? And also, how do you engage the industry partners? And of course, let's say you get the Medtronic and these guys, right? They have their own view about how things will work, right? So how do you navigate that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I will say that partners don't always need to be a multinational like
True.
a Siemens or a Bayer or Baxter, right? Um, Navigating those partners, um, I think is getting to the right decision maker. It's tremendously helpful if you know what their therapeutic areas are, what their business units are like, some of the org structure, what are their priorities. That would be incredibly helpful. And actually, that is a challenge in Singapore because we don't have those decision makers sitting around.
Mm,
So I will say also that a lot of the doctors, more the doctors than the scientists, again, they have an advantage. When you go to certain conferences, you want to be targeting the decision makers and not the sales reps, right?
mm.
So the sales reps are not gonna, be thinking about disrupting their own business
No, of course not.
product, right? Their product line. Yeah. So I will also say that we've gotten quite lucky working with SMEs,
Mm,
some local, some foreign. So we have one product that was 12 years of partnership. And then we licensed the IP to it was a UK SME at like year 7 or
mm,
8, right?
mm,
Which means we worked with them for like 7 or 8 years before there was a licensing deal. So before that, it was like a research collaboration agreement and a clinical trial agreement, and then IP joint IP filing. And that actually worked out really well. And they got like double digit royalties for that, which is really quite unheard of. But because we de-risked so much of the product with grants and we supported the IP filing, um, and our PI was a key opinion leader in the relevant circles. The UK SME was very happy to give us a double-digit royalty rate.
mm. Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think we need more of that. Uh, I think even now, we still like in Singapore, we feel like there's not enough of this, right? What do you think are the what do you think is the reason? Like what do you think is the main bottleneck for the ecosystem?
I think we're too far from a lot of decision makers, right? And
Mm,
even if there is good innovation here, the people with the funding and the money, there is also a lot of innovation and good IP in their own backyard. So the motivation for them to come to Singapore or even Southeast Asia is not high, right?
mm,
And like I said, even though we have all the multinational companies and all that, it's not really the decision makers who are sitting out here. So I think just visibility, being on people's radar,
mm,
having that regular engagement and touch point.
mm. Yeah, I mean, like for instance, like I used to speak with a lot of folks from Organon. Organon was a women's health MNC, but then their M&A, the corporate development team is actually sitting in New York. So, or New York or somewhere in the US. So it's like sometimes it's kind of hard to pitch, like, hey, we have an interesting opportunity here. Can you look? It's like for this kind of thing. But actually, Singapore still does have an advantage compared to other Asian countries because, like, they don't have an MNC guys headquarter in Taiwan, right? For instance, right? They have their own SMEs, of course. Korea, same thing, right? But a lot of actually the regional head is in Singapore. So actually, compared to these other Asian countries, in a way, it's still closer to the decision makers. Well, of course, these countries have their own companies, right? Who can be the kind of a industry partner. So I guess that's the difference. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But from my time at EDB, where I interacted with a lot of the senior leadership, right, in the MNCs, they're not really interested. They're not the right people. It's not that they're not interested. They're not the right people because their area of responsibility, for example, is manufacturing, right? So they're really not the right people to be talking to for innovation or even their venture, venture their venture funds, right? The corporate venture funds. And or they're like the country general manager. And the country general manager again has very different
Very little say.
KPIs, right?
Yes, very
Yeah.
little. So I spent a lot of time in Philippines and Thailand. So I also get plugged into their ecosystem once in a while. Um, I mean, for countries like this, it's even more challenging because obviously, yes, I mean, even less decision makers, right? I mean, from the MNC perspective, and their local companies are not, I guess, a very like they don't have much conviction about their own innovation. So like when I go to the schools here, like the University of the Philippines, I'm a faculty there, by the way. I think I told you. I talked to and they're talking to me about innovation. I'm just like, well, but then this is a bit, they really need to polish this, like I mean, these guys have an advantage in a sense that they have more population, right? They also have a
Mm.
lot more natural resources, like the herbal ingredients, marine, like whatever life, whatever.
Yeah.
They,
Yeah.
they could be an API. And they also have a
Yeah.
lot of they also have a lot of engineers. I mean, the if you look at the number of engineers they produce versus Singapore, I mean, these guys are big countries, right? So they have an advantage there. But then the stuff that they're coming up with is like they really need a lot of polishing.
Yeah.
So I think Singapore still is actually in a good position compared to that actually.
Yeah.
I do see that in Thailand, actually, like I also go to Thailand a lot nowadays. Interestingly, a lot of companies also coming up. The government over there have become a bit more progressive. Something I think our folks in Singapore, some of them I guess get exposed, some of them don't, but actually quite interesting. Their conglomerates are now investing in health tech, and they already went to digital health, but now they're trying to go into medical device. I had one ex-civil servant shared with me a deal from Thailand where they're developing this kind of a catheter to filter the contrast media from patients. People with the renal disease, right? They have trouble
Hmm.
like filtering this out. So they have made some catheter, something like that. I mean, who would have thought, right? I mean, of course, their entrepreneur comes from the US, of course. I mean,
Hmm.
so they usually these guys are more forward thinking and they come in. But it seems like a Thailand ecosystem. They've. I think maybe next time I'll try to like do one episode with you. With the different folks there, it'd be quite interesting, and maybe you can
Yeah.
even, visit. I'm trying to have an event maybe next month actually.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll be quite interesting. But yeah, it's actually quite they're in a pretty interesting inflection point. Of course, in terms of the quality and the volume, I think Singapore still is a very like I mean still ahead. Of course, I mean they if you ask them, they also admit it. But I think it almost feels like last few years. I mean, last few years, it feels like the ecosystem has kind of had like kind of like like less excitement and progress in terms of. I mean, I don't know. It's just my opinion, but I don't know. Maybe I don't know how you think. I know like it was also contributed by some of the investment, I guess, write-offs with the
Mm.
Singapore, like some of the biotech opportunities. But it feels like nowadays, when you talk to the investment funds, they always say, "Oh, we're looking for revenue generating companies." So I'm just kind of a shocked, right? Did you have this kind of problem? I mean, did you did you have this kind of problem also before? And do you see some challenges moving ahead? I mean, where do you think Singapore is right now in terms of the ecosystem? Yeah,
Yeah, it's a very interesting kind of fragmented ecosystem, I would say, where in investors and funding are concerned. There is an incredible amount of funding in the public sector.
of course.
Um, but they are saying that, oh, the private investment isn't coming in to kind of, take over, right? And it's partially because of what I talked about, right? We're just so far away from a lot of the decision makers and where the private funds are. But the Singapore funds, Singapore-based funds, we're competing against real estate, right? Which is
Yes, yes.
pretty, pretty gives a pretty decent yield or REITs or
Yes,
you know
yes.
that sort. And also the there's a slight obsession over two things. Like it must be sexy, right? And sexy isn't what's gonna make the money. And I feel like we're playing catch up every time we try to go after sexy because we're always sexy minus two or something, right? And the other obsession is we want like a unicorn, right? And unicorns are just far and few in between. I'm not saying it's not a good aspiration, but like all the projects that I'm working on, they're not gonna be unicorns, right? I'll be upfront about
Mm,
that. But
mm.
they're really good projects,
Yeah,
and they're
yeah.
gonna bring good returns.
Mm,
They are going to benefit the population globally, not just in Singapore.
mm.
But they're not going to be on the radar of any of the Singapore-based investors and funds.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't matter where we're still chugging along, we're still, bootstrapping, we're still, doing it ground up. But
Mm.
I know that, I don't even bother to bring it to any of the usual suspects of the Singapore-based funds.
Yeah, I mean that's yeah, so I mean when you talk to the investors, they also have to make their return, right? And of course their LPs are gonna be like, hey, why aren't you investing in Anthropic
Yeah.
opportunities, right? So
Yeah, so I feel we're overly obsessed with like the big names, the unicorns, the bangs, right? The big bangs. But many little bangs are happening, right? So I kind of prefer to maybe work with those smaller banks and a little bit under the radar and it's less frustrating and I'm less disillusioned, right? Because if I were to take some of these smaller projects, um, they're gonna get poo-pooed at. So
yes, yes, happens. And I guess even the ones that show some clinical utility, right? They're gonna be like, oh, okay, how about the commercial traction? Like, I mean, there's always gonna be some higher bar, right? Yeah, so that's a challenge.
yeah, that is. But there's still a lot of good work that can be done. So that's what I'm kind of focused on rather than, like saying that, oh, there are no unicorns. And then you forget that you have a lot of other things that you can support and grow, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Hey, so you were with the NUHS, but I know there's also other clusters in Singapore, right? Like,
Mhm.
are there any like? I mean, I know they are like also in the university health system kind of a setting, but can you share like some differences, like something that's like okay, maybe these guys are more strong in this, or maybe this is their
Yeah.
style. I mean, that people I think that could appreciate, when they navigate. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a very personal opinion, right?
Of course, of course,
But
yeah.
I'm happy to share. So I
Mm,
used to joke. So I think technically speaking, there are three healthcare clusters, but there are two academic health systems.
mm,
One is NUHS, the
yeah.
other is SingHealth.
Right.
So I used to always describe NUHS as we're the Lord of the Ring because we have one chief executive that rules us all.
Wow.
Um, but SingHealth is Game of Thrones, and you don't know who the King of the North is. There's the
Wow.
Eye Research Institute, the Heart Institute, the Cancer Center, and then there's the hospital. And they're all their own private entities, private limiteds, right? They all have their own P&L and there's no ring that rules them all. So um if you wanted to say work on an eye project,
Mm,
it probably is faster to go to the Eye Research Institute at SingHealth.
mm,
because they're quite autonomous and they can make their own decisions and partnerships.
mm,
But if you wanted to do maybe a bigger picture, more comprehensive engagement, then NUHS has a more centralized function,
mm.
right? And that's not to say one is better than the other, it's just the way that they were set up.
So like a bigger
And
picture, what do you mean by like bigger picture?
so for example, if an MNC comes in and says, I want to work across disease domains, right?
Mm,
Then
okay.
NUHS, it's a little bit easier because there's a central coordinating office and stuff like that. So I would say that's better that way, right? And the practices are more consistent because
Mm,
it's one central office and function, right? There is a third healthcare cluster, and they also have a medical school. It's the National Healthcare Group, NHG, and they
mm,
have the Lee Kong Chian School of Medicine that kind of they were partnered. So SingHealth is partnered with Duke, right, for Duke NUS Medical School, graduate medical school. NUS Medical School is the oldest. In fact, it's the school that started the National University, right? So NUS Yong Lu Lin School of Medicine is the academic partner for NUHS. NHG has Lee Kong Chian School of Medicine, and that had some roots with Imperial College in the UK. So that's also an undergraduate medical degree.
mm,
So in terms of academic kind of partnership, NHG is the newest, right? Even though as a cluster, they are the oldest cluster. But
mm.
because they're the oldest cluster, they also have one of the heaviest patient volume and patient loads, right? So I remember back when I was with EDB, I worked with all three clusters, right? Because I don't care. I bring companies and they want to find the right PI. I felt that my NHG PIs had the least bandwidth to
Mm.
work with industry because their patient load is just so high.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I guess this would be also useful for somebody, like let's say, like they want to partner with a, let's say overseas company wants to partner with a local clinician, right, to develop something further. And I think it'd be good for them to understand these nuances. I mean, I actually I've been in Singapore for I don't know how many years, but I didn't know actually. So this is actually quite a. I mean, I think well, because you're in I think like a leadership role, so I think it's easier to see these things. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I will say even a lot of my PIs and and colleagues don't know the difference, right? But because I started at EDB, I kind of had a bird's eye view. And then when I zoomed in and then I spoke to people, it really helped me appreciate the strengths and weaknesses, right? And again, like I said, it's not that one is uniformly stronger than the other. So it really depends on what you're looking for. And at the end of the day, you need to find your KOL and then you need to understand the cluster that your KOL belongs to and what's the best way to work with a cluster.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of companies we can bring, so I think definitely would want to explore this more. Uh, my last question to you is, I think we can end after that. But my
Mhm.
last question is, where do you see? I mean, your view on different, I guess, I mean, the sector, the health systems, and also different kind of, I guess, like the clusters with the EDB view, and you also work with a lot of device and innovation, I guess, companies. Where do you think are some interesting things happening in Singapore? That I mean, let's say if we talk to somebody from US or Europe or some overseas, and we talk to them about Singapore ecosystem, what are some of the interesting, I guess, developments happening? It doesn't have to. It can be early or it can be late, but something that you think would be quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think um, I used to say that what I didn't like to work on
Mm,
in terms of projects was I called it SOBA,
mm,
same old but Asian. Right? So I don't like to do things just because like, oh, this is for the Asian um, uh, population.
I'm sure it happens
Right.
quite a lot even now. Yeah.
Yeah. There's room for that, but I kind of want to start from the Asian perspective, right? Not kind of retrofit it for Asians. And I think with like China being on this incredible trajectory, and then Asia, both, East Asia, Southeast Asia, being the more populous countries, I think it would be very interesting to be looking at innovation ground up from Asia rather than, taking something from the West and then kind of either force fitting or retrofitting for Asia, right? So I like to think that's kind of in the future.
Yeah, I mean, just like the one you just mentioned in the beginning, right? The clinician that you mentioned, right? But of course, there are many other different areas, right? So yeah, I think there will be and of course, it's not just Singapore, but also other Asian countries. I mean, China already has made a lot of progress, right? But of course, we might see something like that in other ecosystem, and of course, Singapore being a more regional hub, we should be able to kind of navigate this and try to, I guess, identify these kind of opportunities early versus other countries who have a more like insular view about the development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So okay, hey, very good. Hey, thank you very much. By the way, after this, we have this quick chat after this, but yeah. So yeah, so thank you very much, Shuwen. It's been great hearing your experience about the NUHS. I think it's good that you also had an EDB experience. So it's a very unique like you can look at it from a bird's eye, but you can also speak from the cluster point of view, and also how it could like I think some entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs could watch this episode and really kind of decide, hey, I could work, through this. And I think you will be a very good, very like a helpful contact for them to like guide this. So yeah, so thank you very much for coming. And yeah, any last words or anything else you want to say?
Yeah. So it's been a year since I left NUHS and NUS, and I still continue to support some of the startups from NUS as well as some of the PIs. So I think, so Singapore has these 5-year research, innovation, and enterprise funding tranches, right? So they just started RIE 2030 in April. So yeah, I think the next few years will be very exciting, and I'm excited to be, in a position where I can hopefully bring opportunities, entrepreneurs, and the solutions and all that together.
Hey, thank you very much. Yeah, so yeah, looking forward to that as well. Yeah. So okay, so thank you very much, and I just
Thanks,
want to
Jaemin.
also thank our audience for participating as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.